next speaker, Nina Wolverton, happens to be more than coincidental that we have her following Cynthia Ramirez, because Cynthia just spoke to you about the results of family involvement in the treatment of the caregivers with mood disorders. And now Nina is going to actually talk about such a program that they have in practice here in Atlanta at Summit Counseling Center. Nina is a staff associate and an intensively trained DBT therapist, also has an MA in family marriage counseling, and she's at, as I said, the Summit Counseling Center up in Johns Creek, I believe. She's worked with multiple populations, including adults, adolescents, relationships, trauma, DBT, anxiety, depression, life transitions, and premarital counseling. That pretty much covers it. During her master's program in marriage and family therapy, she actually held internships here at Skyland Trail and at Hope Counseling Center, where she worked with individuals, couples, and groups utilizing DBT and other modalities. In the same way that she encourages her clients, she loves to look at her own life in a holistic viewpoint. And she is, I think, the poster child for continuous learning and self-improvement. She's always challenging herself to be the healthiest she can be physically, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. She is always looking for opportunities to continue expanding her knowledge in a wide variety of areas. And she's a nonstop adventuresome traveler, somebody after my own heart, who currently is working on achieving one of her lifelong goals, which is to become fluent. We've been talking a lot about language, but it's to become fluent in 3 languages. So here is Nina to talk about a best practice of combining parents and adolescents in DBT skills class. Here. So many different versions of this. I hope you got the right one.
Looks great to me.
Okay. Is that the wrong one? But that works. Oh, should I try another one? Okay. We had several versions of this. Is that the right one?
Mm-hmm. They both work.
They both work. That's fine. As long as we can see it, we're in good shape.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? I forgot that I had put on there that I wanted to be fluent in 3 languages because I just got back from Mexico, which Spanish is one of the languages I want to learn, and I'm leaving for Switzerland this week, so German is my 3rd one. So here we go. I'm really excited about that. So just to let you guys know a little bit about the center that I work at, just to kind of set the framework a little bit. I work at a group practice out in Johns Creek. We are an outpatient therapy center. We actually have 3 main locations, and then we work in 8 different schools. The schools kind of contract with some of our therapists, and they will be in there 1 to 2 days a week to have actual counseling sessions, go through. I mean, it is like a typical therapy session. They just don't have to leave their school, which is really nice. Kind of check in, check out. So knowing that, we actually have a very large adolescent population that we work with. Our therapists cover a wide variety of specialties, including anxiety, bullying, depression, divorce, eating disorders, grief, trauma, kind of what you would anticipate with a group practice. So knowing that and seeing the number of adolescents that we had and the fact that our adolescent population was increasing in numbers, we decided that we probably needed to make sure that we had the tools and the skills to actually work with this population. Back in 2014, we started our DBT program, and we just had one therapist who is intensively trained, and she came in and was kind of trying to set up the protocol to make sure that we were following the best practices and making sure that we were doing what needed to be done. Since then, we have had 5 other therapists go in and get intensively trained in DBT, and at this time, we currently have 4 intensively trained DBT therapists. So when we started, our sweet founder of DBT at our center was trying to run everything by herself. So she had set up an adolescent group, an adult skills group, and a family skills group. And the family skills group consisted of the parents of our adolescents as well as the spouses or significant others of the members of our adult DBT group. She was running all 3 of these. I'm not sure how she had time or the capacity to do so, and she knows her limits, so she did a pretty good job. With each of these groups, she had other clinicians who would come in and help her, but at that time they had not been intensively trained in DBT, so she did the primary teaching. We had a closed group model, which I'll explain a little bit more about later, and then we followed the 25-week schedule. So all of this was kind of in alignment with what is found to be most effective, or one of the ways that you can set up your therapy. But we've made some changes to it since then. Between, I think it was September of 2015, is when the rest of us went and actually got intensively trained in DBT. And so when we came back, kind of the way that it's set up, which I love, is that you go through the beginning, you learn all the skills, the tools, everything, and then they give you 6 months to put into practice what they've taught you. And we had a very feisty and very educated woman who came up to us and said, you know what, you guys are doing great work, why have you not combined your adolescence and family? And everything that we had read, everything we had come across, we were like, I didn't realize that that's what we were supposed to be doing. So she encouraged us in the 6 months to put this into practice, to implement it, and then come back and kind of report on our findings and look at how this structure worked. So I heard Cynthia, it sounded like you guys were very kind in easing your adolescents into that. We were not as kind. We did speak with the adolescents individually in sessions, prepared them, and it was a lovely teaching opportunity because it was like, here are the skills that you can use if you're getting a little upset with the fact that you're with your parents in this group. And with parents, they did not get as nice of a transition as we gave the adolescents, but we did give everyone 2 to 3 week forewarning of, hey, we're gonna try this, we're gonna combine this, and we're gonna see how this goes. Honestly, at our center, we don't actually give our adolescents the option of their parents not coming. We tell them that an adult, it does not necessarily have to be their parent, but that there needs to be a family member who's living in their home that has to come. So at this time, the way that we have now transitioned it, the people who conduct the skills training, we have at least one intensively trained DBT therapist in every single one of our groups. Sometimes we may have an intern as a co-leader, sometimes we may have another therapist who is trained in another modality, but part of our commitment in sticking to the model is that we then make it mandatory for those co-leaders to come to our consultation team meetings. They have to come, they have to know what our goals are, they have to know what we're targeting with each of the individual behaviors, and it just does, it does a more effective job of making sure that everyone's involved. Kind of the way that it stands right now, I'm leading the adolescent group, and I have for almost 2 years now. And for the most part, I don't see a lot of adolescent DBT clients. My other colleagues do. So it stays true to the model in the sense that I only teach them their skills and their individual therapist only works with them individually. This tends to be helpful for a few reasons. They can learn their skills from a variety of people. The way that I teach is different from the way that their individual therapist may teach them certain skills. It kind of gives them a more comprehensive view. It gives them a few different options. It also helps too because sometimes our adolescents will get really excited that their therapist is up front, and so then they're like wanting to cut up a little bit, they're wanting to joke around, or they may, if they were frustrated with them earlier in the week from their session, sometimes that can take away from their ability to be present. So as it stands, we always have 2 leaders. I'm teaching most of them. And then one thing that we do that's a little different for the multifamily group compared to the family group and then the adolescent group is that I will offer phone consultation skills for the parents. With the DBT model itself, doing full protocol, individuals will have individual sessions. They will go to the skills group, and they also have access to phone consultation, but that's with their individual counselor. More often than not, parents are not necessarily provided the same support. So with me being the skills group leader and being the one who has taught the parents the use of these skills, I am available for them to call should they need support. It's helpful because I'm not the individual therapist, so I do not know the nitty-gritty details that the individual therapist knows. I very much treat it the same way that the adolescent's individual therapist treats it, in that I'm like, okay, what's the problem? This is what you need to do. This is how you de-escalate yourself. Go. And I know it sounds very insensitive, but I don't want to talk for 30 minutes on the phone if I don't have to. So it is something that is a little unique that I think parents often do not necessarily have access to. So who are the participants? So at our particular center, the participants are only high schoolers. And I say this, some people are like, oh, is it based on a certain age? At our center, we have chosen to only offer this to individuals who are currently in high school. We do have some older 14-year-olds that are still in middle school, and we just don't let them come until they're in high school. Most of our clients who are in our skills group, they are currently seeking individual counseling. And kind of the way that we set it up, with every person that's interested, we make them come and have an interview with one of the DBT therapists if they're not currently seeing a DBT therapist. It's just a 50-minute session trying to figure out whether or not they're appropriate for the class itself. If there are outside therapists, we still do the interview process, but what we do is we get an informed consent to contact the outside therapist. And we will tell them things that we notice in the group. We will let them know what we're teaching that particular week. So we really try to keep the communication as open and as flowing as possible. Most of our individuals are also seeing psychiatrists and maybe on medication, but we like to remind people that medication is not the only effective way in dealing with treatment. And so the skills group and individual sessions are also very important as well. But all of that is to say too, best practices actually says, and research says that if an individual is not able to go to individual counseling, that the skills group is the most effective. So teaching them how to manage all of their emotions, teaching them what to do when they're dysregulated. So if they're only in skills group, that's okay if that's all they can afford for right now. And more often than not, we'll say, hey, it's really most effective if you're also in individual sessions, and let's see if we can enroll you in that afterwards. So we also have family members of the adolescent. So this can be the main parent. It could be, sometimes in some situations, we have them come with the parent that they're having the most conflict with, which can make the group a little exciting, but I'm always up for a good challenge, depending on whether or not that would be most effective. It could be the guardian, but primarily what we're doing is looking for someone who's willing, available, and has a good relationship with the adolescent. I know someone had asked earlier, and I'll talk about this a little bit during case studies. We have had one adolescent who was actually in foster care. Both of her parents were deceased, and we knew that she was potentially moving towards adoption. And so we had her bring her foster parents in, which actually was very effective for her as well, to feel like she had support and encouragement from that individual as she was going through the skills group herself. And we generally try to limit the group to 5 to 6 adolescents and 10 to 15 group members. We did accidentally go over that one time, and it can be done, but it's a little hard to manage sometimes. So since then, we learned our lesson, and we keep it down to about 10 to 15. Who do we typically exclude from the multifamily groups? Sometimes people want to bring their significant others, and while I understand that, we try to exclude them from it. If there are family members who cannot consistently come to the group, we ask them maybe not to come. We have had situations where like the mother will consistently come and dad can only come here and there, and that's fine for us because we at least know one parent is consistently there. And in my humble opinion, if the more people in the family that are learning the skills and utilizing them, the better it is. So if there is someone in which there's a really unhealthy relationship and high potential for therapy interfering behavior, we won't do that. And I know that's a little in contradiction with what I said of, oh, we might bring the parent that we have the most conflict with. But we've also found that there are some people where some adolescents where they may have like irritation and frustration towards their parents, and then there's some in which they're very argumentative and can't focus. So if we feel like it's a relationship in which they'll still be able to remain engaged in the treatment, then we feel like that's okay. And oftentimes we're kind of screening that out in the interview process. We definitely do not include anyone if an individual feels unsafe, or if the parent does not have a managed or treated mental disorder. At this time, we do not offer any non-English groups, non-English speaking groups, but So we ask that the individual is able to understand what is being stated. So our groups are currently a closed group, and it's kind of a mix. It's closed and opened. It's closed in the sense that each module is either 7 weeks, 8 weeks, or 9 weeks. And the individual has the first 2 weeks to join the group, and at that point we close it. So the first 2 weeks of each module is typically going over mindfulness, or sometimes it's going over walking the middle path, which I'll explain in a moment. So they have the opportunity to join during those first 2 weeks, but once those first 2 weeks are over with, the group is closed. I find this to be very effective and helpful in the sense that it takes a really long time for our adolescents to, first of all, even feel comfortable with their parents being there. Second of all, being comfortable with the other adolescents that are in there. And it's also kind of nice too because they know at the end of each module there's potential for other students to come in. It never fails. The students tend to get comfortable with one another in the group in the last 2 weeks of the group. I don't know why it is, but they're always cutting up and it's wonderful. So it's kind of nice that they have some of the overlap to the next group, but maybe it might be different people coming in as well. And it's helpful too because it teaches them how to kind of manage their skills and then learn how to be adaptable as they move from module to module. One of the things that is also very effective is that it kind of creates a seniority amongst the group. We have, at the end of each module, we will have a graduation ceremony. And it'll be an opportunity for us as therapists to give our clients cheerleading statements, words of affirmation, to encourage them, to build them up. We give them little gifts, and then we actually ask them to talk about which module was most helpful for them and their thoughts. And more often than not, the response that we get is, I did not want to be here. I did not want to do this. I was really willful, and this has been really effective. Or we actually just had our graduation ceremony this Thursday, and one of the mothers said, I did not think that this was for me. I thought that you were foolish for making me come to this, and I found out that I actually needed a lot more skills than I originally anticipated. So it can be very validating and encouraging for other people to just kind of hear and see how it's impacted others. In terms of our content and schedule, we still follow the 25-week model, but we do have some modifications. What is different about our multifamily group compared to just our adult group or our like the spouses or significant others of the members of the adult group is that we also talk about the middle path, which again I'll explain in just a moment. So kind of the 5 things that we're teaching are mindfulness. I'm assuming that you guys know a fair amount of what mindfulness is. I'll briefly read that, but kind of tell you how it looks different for us with adolescents. So we're just trying to teach them how to be present in the moment, how to live with their eyes wide open, how to observe, describe, and participate in a non-judgmental, one-mindful, and effective way. How this looks different for adolescents is that we tend to use a lot of very interactive mindfulness. We typically try to stick with mindfulness activities that are related to the module that we're going into. So for example, if we are going into interpersonal effectiveness, we'll do a lot of loving kindness, learning how to extend it towards themselves, towards others, talk a lot, very extensively about how comfortable or uncomfortable it is in the end. But we try to use things that are kind of interactive because a lot of what we're doing too is we're bringing the parents down to a place where they look a little bit more human, as well as finding a way to help the adolescents connect with their parents. So we try to do this in a way that kind of sets the tone. First of all, brings everyone in, because one thing that we tend to find is that sometimes the mindfulness is more difficult for the parents. Like we'll have the dads coming in after work and the temptation is to check their email and to keep looking at, the business day has not ended. So I think it puts the kids and the parents on an equal plane when the rule is, okay, everybody put your cell phones in here. Dads do, Dad, I see you trying to look at that. Put it in the basket. So it already brings them to a place of going, okay, we're here. How can we be present? And we always leave time afterwards to talk about the impact of mindfulness, what was coming up, what things we're noticing. Again, I think it becomes a safe environment in which the adolescents eventually learn, like, oh wow, my parents are they were once young too. Or, I mean, sometimes as an icebreaker, I will have everyone say what high school they go to, and for parents, I'll be like, so what high school did you go to, even though you're however many years out. A lot of times too with mindfulness, we will try to use activities that do not produce shame, so a lot more, that it's not competitive. It's interactive, but it's not competitive. And then we have interpersonal effectiveness, which is one of our modules. I really, really, really love this one within the context of parents and their adolescents because it is so interactive. What we are trying to do is kind of give them the courage to ask for what they want or need, to say no, to manage conflict, maintain relationships, manage self-respect. It can become really fun. Like this week, we were teaching on how intensely to ask for something and how intensely to say no to something. First of all, with most of these, I give personal examples. And I don't know that she knows this, and I'm sure she's really going to love me calling her out, but Clarissa Cooper was my clinical director when I was here. And I had to ask her really early on in my internship year whether or not she would allow me to get intensively trained in DBT, because it was going to take me out 2 weeks of my internship. And so I always use the example of, was I allowed to ask her at this point? And it's always funny going through the transaction and asking the kids, like, do I give more than this person gives? And I was like, at this time, no. Last night they were like, yes, absolutely. I'm like, no, I had no idea what I was doing, but I appreciate your confidence in me. But then turning it around on the kids too. We had a mother and a son who were in an ongoing discussion of, he wanted chemistry supplies because he wants to build things at home, and she wanted to say no. And so we walked through, like, how intensely do you ask for these chemistry supplies? And mom, how strongly do you say no? So it's an opportunity to put it into practice. We do a lot of role playing. Sometimes if we know that it's a parent that they're having high conflict with, we may ask them to start with something really small, like, hey, why don't you ask your dad if you could go get ice cream after class? But it helps them feel more competent and makes them feel like they are able to be more skillful in these situations. The next 3 modules are emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and walking the middle path. Emotion regulation, I enjoy this one too, because we just use a lot of examples of, like, okay, so you may have experienced this with your teachers, or you may experience this with your boss, or you may experience this between parent and child. We don't always give those kinds of examples just because there is potential for some emotion dysregulation. And we also don't want to shy away from it either, because we do not believe that our clients are fragile. So trying to find ways to engage them, bring them in, and just talk about different responses that they've had in the past. With distress tolerance, a lot of that we will kind of create a setting and a scene in which they feel like they are having their emotional vulnerability reduced. We are actually utilizing these skills. What I like, and I'll talk a minute about the structure, is that our group is set up in a way that even if an individual is emotionally dysregulated in the middle of group, we can help them de-escalate themselves. And so the entire time that they're there, even though it's technically a break, we have ongoing skills that we're teaching them. And then the last one, and again, this is the one that's new and not necessarily utilized with the adults, is the walking the middle path. So we talked to them a lot about the dialectics and dialectical dilemmas, and I know Cynthia talked a fair amount about this, so I won't go into it too much. But one thing that we really emphasize is validating how the other person's perspective, and also going into problem solving. So, I understand that you feel upset or that you're sad, and I don't think that the most appropriate way is for you to throw something at me, and there might be a more effective way, and how can we teach you to express this emotion without threats. Again, we talk about validation, and then behaviorism, so acceptance versus change. So kind of as an orientation and introduction to the group, we're very interactive with these kids. It's very high energy if we can be. We are also asking them to do this at the end of the day on a Thursday. We had one gentleman who had graduated from high school and was still coming into skills group. in his last summer before he left to college. And so we try to, we find the balance of high energy and still allowing them to learn things. But I tend to be a little goofy, a little over the top, but we want to do it in a way where they're actually getting something out of it. So when we initially have them introduce themselves, we like to use a lot of icebreakers if we can. In some situations, they may be very uncomfortable talking in front of the group of people, so sometimes we'll have them introduce their partner that's next to them. Take some time to speak with the other person, because it can be easier for me to introduce the person that's next to me as opposed to talking about myself. Which, in terms of the trainers, we try to do memorable things, telling them funny facts about ourselves, whatever we can do that will stick, but also make the parents feel a little connected to us as well. In terms of limits of confidentiality, this one's always a little interesting too, because I am not their individual therapist. We only go to a certain depth within the skills group themselves. I will often ask clients not to talk about specifics of what's going on, so not saying, my self-harming behavior, but instead they say that thing that I do. So that way we're not going into details or triggering other people. That being said, the clients and the students are also very aware of the fact that we have our consultation team, and they're very aware that if they're acting up in class, I will be reporting it back to their individual therapist, and that we take very much of a collaborative focus. And even if there's something in particular that they're working on in session, that we may be reinforcing it in the skills group. So we make that very clear. They've also heard that in their individual sessions before coming to see us in the skills group. But we just like to remind them of that too. We will talk about the rationale for the program and the treatment goals. And what I really appreciate about this too is that we're looking at a lot of the dysregulation or the ineffective behaviors. And we ask both the parents and the adolescents to talk about where they might need some help, where they might need some additional skills. Sometimes we'll ask parents if they're having difficulty thinking of it right now. We'll say, okay, well, maybe in the past, when you were your child's age, where did you have some difficulty, or where may you have been not quite as effective? Biosocial theory, I know Cynthia mentioned that one too. This one's always a little interesting. The first time I presented this to the parents and the adolescents, I was like, ooh, this has the potential to be very invalidating. So a lot of times I focus on when can communication be invalidating, when could certain behaviors be invalidating. And I always mention my poor father, whom I love and adore, and the fact that he just, when I was growing up, he did not understand when I said, hey Dad, I'm sad. But he understood my tears, and he understood the waterworks. And so sometimes using personal examples like that, and then I even tell them too, and now my dad and I are at a point where we can communicate that better, and I don't feel like I have to cry, and he understands me. We talk about the DBT assumptions, and this one can always be a little tricky as well. One of the things that we mention are various things such as we believe that everyone is doing the best that they can, and they can do better. Sometimes this does not sit very well with my adolescents. They're like, I don't actually think my parents are doing the best that they can. And I often agree with them sometimes. But no, I'm just teasing. But I do tell them, I'm like, these are the assumptions we're living out of. This is how we genuinely treat other people. This is what we believe. Even the idea that people want to be better, that they want to be happier. And honestly, the reason that we bring it up to them is because sometimes it's just a great reminder for ourselves as clinicians. I genuinely think that people would not choose to live in misery if they had the ability to not live in misery. And so reminding them, this is how we're viewing you, and this is how we're asking you to view one another. And we'll talk about that if it continues to come up. And it's funny because we actually bring up the assumptions at the beginning of every module, so our adolescents and their parents hear it 3 times. And so the first time they hear it, there's like a lot of pushback, and towards the second and third, it's like, oh, okay, there might be some truth to this. So, orienting the members to the group rules. A lot of times it's kind of asking them what things they want to have as group rules, as well as encouraging them not to have relationships outside of therapy, various things like that, talking about confidentiality, but we kind of lay it out right at the beginning. And then we have all of our members sign an agreement. One thing that tends to really encourage our clients is that we make them pay for the full class up front. And if they've paid for it, then they're more likely to show up, so that's nice. We say in there that parents have to be coming consistently. We have the maximum number of groups that an individual can miss is 2. And if they miss 4 consecutively between individual sessions and group sessions, they are put on a vacation. So it's encouraging to our parents too, and we also tell them that they have the same rules, that they need to come to as many group sessions as they can. And we are a little flexible in the sense that if mom's going to be out 3 weeks, but she can send dad one time, we'll let that count. So we have all of them sign an agreement, and we talk about it with them pretty extensively as well. In terms of the structure of our group, we kind of have a first half and a second half. The first half, again, starts out with mindfulness to kind of bring them here, help them be centered. And again, it tends to be something that's along the lines of what we're teaching. Then we'll have our homework practice review. And with this, we are literally going to every single member of the group. We spend about 4 to 5 minutes on each person. So parents are included in that. I think it is something that kind of brings the kids to a place of, wow, you know, they're held to the same standards that I am. And this is something that can be effective for them too. One of the things that we utilize if someone does not complete their homework is a behavioral chain analysis. And we'll do a short one in which we go, okay, Dad, what got in the way of you getting your homework done? What do you think you could do differently? And sometimes we'll sit there and very practically help them come up with answers in that moment. Oh, you want to set an alarm? Did Tuesday tend to work for you? And we'll really break it down. And it's not in a way that's supposed to be shame-provoking, but it's supposed to be something to encourage them. And we do the same with our adolescents. We will take a break. And this is really important because if we notice that there's some tension going on in the room, if we notice that if there's anxiety, if we notice that someone's dysregulated, this is our opportunity to sit down and go, okay, hey, what skills do you need to use? Okay, do you need to walk a lap real quick? It's also an opportunity for them to interact with each other. Because we take their phones from them, it's an opportunity for them to check their phones because sometimes they're just itching for it. They have to know how many likes they have or whatever else. So it's an opportunity to relieve some of that and then move on to the next one. And then the second half, we're teaching the new skills. It is very, sometimes, depending on the group, we'll do it like a classroom setting, so it'll be kind of like this. Other times, we'll actually have it set up in more of a rectangle where they can see one another. But again, it's pretty interactive. I spend a lot of my time kind of individually calling people out if they're not volunteering. So everyone speaks at some point during the sessions, but it's just to make sure that they're still engaged and part of it. And then as a wind down, we'll just kind of describe non-judgmentally things that they learned or things that they noticed, which just kind of is a little conclusion. And we tend to do little announcements. Certain strategies that we have, we try to increase their motivation. A lot of this is through positive reinforcement, sometimes directly calling on them. We've had situations where we have brought in cupcakes and cookies and various things like that. If I've noticed that they're consistently doing their homework, or if I feel like they've been really engaged or just done really good work, because it can be difficult to ask them, especially during like midterms and finals, and we try to be conscious of that when we're scheduling them to make sure that they're still getting gaps as well, but just trying to motivate them. Increasing homework compliance, again, we kind of use positive reinforcement. We had a season where our clients were not consistently doing their homework, and so we told them, if you do it for the next 3 weeks, then we'll take a break. Unbeknownst to them, that was a week we weren't supposed to have homework anyways, but it worked really well. It was very effective on my part. So just doing different things like that. Validating them, again, just teaching them the importance of validation and how to validate one another. And I think a lot of what helps too is that we as clinicians and therapists are spending a lot of our time validating the clients, of going, okay, I totally understand how you feel that way, and just continuing to challenge. I think the setup of the group in and of itself is validating, because I find that more often than not, one adolescent will be complaining about something with their parents, and I'm watching other parents' faces light up of like, oh, wow, I'm not the only one that has to deal with that. Or even situations where a parent has been complaining about a particular behavior of an adolescent, and then another adolescent that's not their child chimes up and is like, and I wonder if they're doing this. And that's when I get really excited, because it's an environment in which they feel confident and comfortable enough to where they can help point out the fact that there may be a different perspective. In terms of handling therapy interfering behaviors in group, honestly, depending on what the behavior is, we may or may not address it. If an individual is doodling, if they are whispering back and forth to each other a little bit, I let it go at first, just because I don't want this to be something very rigid. But my number one priority is making sure they know the skills. And by talking with them and interacting with them, if I can see that they're doodling but they still understand what I'm teaching them, I let them go for it, even with parents too. So that kind of brings us to what we as an organization utilize. So in the 6 months in which we had the gap, they asked us to give a particular measure to our clients called the DIRS, so the Difficulty in Emotion Regulation Scale. So what this is it's a 36-item self-report questionnaire that is designed to assess multiple aspects of emotion dysregulation. So higher scores suggested greater problems with emotion regulation, and it was measured across 6 subscales. So the first one is non-acceptance of emotional responses, typically from others, but also from themselves as well. Difficulties in engaging in goal direction behaviors, so just not being able to accomplish whatever goal it is that they were trying to accomplish. Impulse control difficulties, lack of emotional awareness, limited access to emotion regulation strategies. And this one I appreciated because you notice a very large spike in that one, particularly after distress tolerance or even emotion regulation modules. And then lack of emotional clarity. So what we found, and unfortunately we did not have a pre-test because we did not know that we were going to be giving these tests to everyone, is that we found an 80% positive change in our clients. Most of them noticed just an increase in change. And it was very helpful. I mean, I tried to find research on like parallel adolescent and parent groups compared to the multifamily groups, and at this point there isn't really a lot of research out. There is the best practices, which has been printed, published, and I know Cynthia talked some about their research, but some of the areas that I tried to find I was not able to, so we did not have a pretest. And so this is what we found, and we were pretty excited about that. But just to tell you guys a little bit about some of the individuals that we have had, so I don't exactly have her information up here because I wasn't anticipating talking about her, but the young girl who was adopted, she was a 16-year-old female who was in Johns Creek. She had grown up in the Chicago area. Her father had murdered her mother and then completed suicide himself, and she actually found them. She had been put into the foster care system and after she came down to Georgia and somehow ended up with a foster family down here. I believe she had a PTSD diagnosis, but that kind of showed up later because we initially saw her pretty soon after the accident, so it had not yet, we couldn't give the official diagnosis, but she came in for GAD, with a GAD diagnosis. But watching her, she actually was with us for one module where we did not have the parents involved, and then we made the switch over, so her parents were involved in the last 2. And seeing, first of all, her increase in skill level, she actually was a little bit different in the sense that she did not display self-harming behaviors or have an increase in suicidal ideation. However, she needed coping skills, and when speaking with her and her family, she wanted more of a consistency and more of a classroom type setting. She also went through individual therapy as well, which has been great because now she's moving more into trauma-based therapy, and so she has the skills available to her. But even having the opportunity to go through the skills training with her foster parents helped grow them closer together. They would practice the homework together as well. And so it was very encouraging to see just how that impacted them. But she was one individual that we've had. We had another individual, I'll call her Susie. She was a 15-year-old female in Johns Creek, and she had a PTSD, GAD, and MDD diagnosis. She had suicidal ideation, multiple suicide attempts via overdose, self-harming behaviors, panic attacks, disordered eating, risky sexual behaviors, flashback, and heightened distrust of others and fear of abandonment. She had a younger brother. Her parents were divorced when she was pretty young. Her father was really aggressive and violent, and they did not have as healthy of a relationship. Her mother was stable but emotionally dysregulated. Her mother was actually sexually abused as a child by a family member, so she had her own therapy that was needed as well. She reported a close relationship with her mother and a very close relationship with her brother. She started with us, again, she was another individual that had one module without her parents, and then the next two, her mother was present. But during that time, she came to us right after she had gotten out of the hospital, and she ended up attempting suicide 1 month into treatment and then 3 months into treatment. But she would still come back and continue going to skills groups. She would continue going to individual sessions. And she eventually got to a point where she became more self-aware. She started to manage her emotions a little bit more. Her mom was one of the parents that we actually provided phone consultation for. So in situations in which the client was emotionally heightened, we could also talk to mom about how to deregulate herself as well and teach her how to respond and interact with her daughter. At this point, we've been seeing her for a year and a half. She is 17 at this point. She's gone back to public school. She's not suicidal anymore. She does not self-harm and does not suffer from severe anxiety. She sometimes has panic attacks and flashbacks. She's not been completely healed. But she is able to use her skills more to manage her triggers. She comes in currently to see her therapist once per month. She's kind of in our maintenance phase. And what's been really nice too is that her mom started with the skills group, her mom actually completed the entire skills group in the family therapy. But then when we said, oh, hey, we're combining this, she went through the last 2 modules again with her daughter to kind of learn them in conjunction with her to be in support with her. And now mom is continuing with her own therapy and doing trauma therapy and has the skills and is able to manage that. So it's kind of fun. It's nice also being in an environment in which we have as many therapists as we do, because sometimes we're able to kind of pass along information and make sure that there's a good continuity of care. But we are continually looking to see if there are various ways that we can improve and adjust our system and our skills group. And we've been excited about the progress we've had so far, but we are looking forward to seeing where we still go. So that is all that I have. I don't know if you guys have any questions or anything. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a question? Mm-hmm. Yes, one right here. Oh, one here.
One here.
You're welcome.
I'm kind of new to all this. Can you give an example of what a new skill is that you might learn in class, and what a weekly homework assignment would be?
Yes, ma'am. So, for example, one of the skills that we may teach is a distress tolerance skill known as a TIP skill. So it stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and progressive muscle relaxation. So we will spend our time in the group actually demonstrating what each one of these is. And we kind of offer a few different varieties. Like for temperature, it could be holding ice cubes. It could be dipping your face in a bucket of cold water, which is actually the most effective. Or it could just be taking a really cold shower. So we'll talk through each one of these examples of how to get ourselves back to a level in which kind of the way I describe it to my clients is I'm so upset that I can't think anymore. My body's just responding. I'm in emotional overdrive. So we'll talk about how to get them down to a point where they'll still probably feel agitated or upset or anxious, but they're able to think and they're able to plan, they're able to figure out what their next step is. So for homework, we actually encourage them to try these various skills that we're learning. So it may be, sometimes in distress tolerance we talk about we always talk about a self-soothe kit. So it'll be go home and make something that is soothing according to your 5 senses. If it's something that you visually look at, that's helpful. If it's something that you hear, that's helpful. And we will bring in our own, I think the beautiful thing is, and with most DBT clinicians, is that we're utilizing the same skills that we're encouraging our clients to use. So I just go get my self-soothe kit out and I bring it in and I show it to them. But it's just showing them very practical ways and then having them kind of report too. Because they may come back and say, you know what, I tried the temperature thing and it did not work for homework. And so it's going, okay, so that didn't work for you, and what might be a more effective skill for you? You're welcome.
And a question over here? Yes. Hold on just a second.
Why is this not covered by insurance?
Why is this not covered by insurance? That's a very good question. I have no idea. Honestly, our practice does not contract with insurance providers simply because it is a really big hassle and because our particular center has so many DBT therapists, intensively trained DBT therapists on staff. Sometimes insurance companies will make an exception to the rule because it is the best practice and through research it's one of the most effective modalities when treating individuals with BPD, but I honestly do not know. I don't know.
Yes.
I just want to speak to that because I started my DBT practice about 4 years ago, and I was initially billing the groups to insurance, which you're running into difficulties because insurance will only pay for an hour to an hour and a half group. And the reimbursable rate is so low that it doesn't even cover your costs. It doesn't cover your prep time, your note time, the extra training for DBT. But I thought, I'll do it. We need it. It will help people access it. And then I had an audit, and the auditor said, why are you not doing psychotherapy? And I said, it's a DBT skills class. Well, we won't pay for that. So they wanted to take back money. So I said, it's a class. And that's why DBT skills is usually, some therapists will work in a little psychotherapy and bill it. I don't do it.
Mm-hmm. And I know at our particular center, I know this is not the case for everyone, but we have funds that we have raised, and so we can offset some of the prices and put people on payment plans if necessary. But yeah, at this time, a lot of centers don't.
Is it because it's based on diagnosis or
No.
There's a question over here. Hold on just a second. Let's do this one and then this one.
Does your group ever plan on expanding it to the elementary age kids and starting groups with that age group? Because there's a definite need for that.
Yeah. No, we are not. Most of the research that we have seen shows full DBT protocol is most effective 13 and up. However, we sometimes do teach some of these skills like a very, very, I'm not a play therapist, so I don't work with anyone under high school age for the most part. But sometimes they will teach very modified versions of these skills, but it does not look nearly the same in terms of structure, various things like that. But there are different coping mechanisms and whatnot that are taught to elementary age school. I think some of what's difficult is that a lot of DBT requires on kind of an increasing level of self-awareness so that individuals can recognize these are my triggers, these are the things that make me emotionally vulnerable, these are the things that potentially set me off for these interactions, and that's a level of self-awareness that elementary age school kids don't necessarily have yet. So it's kind of that's why it tends to be more effective with older adolescents. However, there are other skills that are taught to that age group. Because you're right, a lot of them are very impulsive and need to learn how to de-escalate themselves too.
Okay, question over here.
Well, I was just going to say about the insurance is that my insurance did cover it. The practice that we went to didn't bill, but we submitted it, and so some insurances do cover it. You just do have to pay up front and then get reimbursement. It may not be at the same rate, but it is covered by more insurances now, I think, than it used to be.
Any other questions for Nina? Yara, you have one?
Yeah.
And then we have one here too.
Okay. I was just wondering if anyone knows if SSI for a child or adolescent on disability, if that covers this type of DBT therapy in groups, such as Summit offers? Or does anyone know?
Sorry, do you mind to repeat the question again?
Okay, so if a child has SSI for disability, diagnosed disability, is that insurance accepted at organizations like Summit for things like DBT, individual therapy, and DBT groups?
So SSI constitutes a Medicaid patient,
Yes.
essentially. So does Medicaid accept that?
And I'll let Cynthia answer. I know we don't accept any insurance, so we're billed to out of network, but that's just the Summit.
So I know that at Emory, for example, they do accept Medicaid. In fact, the SSI, the disability form of Medicaid, is the only one that they will take. They won't take any of the Peach Care managed care ones, but they will take SSI. So Emory for adults, and it used to be for adolescents as well, would take it and would cover DBT.
And we have a question over here.
So I'm wondering if Summit has any options for kids who are in middle school. So you're saying for 13 and 14-year-olds, and if not, are there options anywhere else for middle school age kids?
There are options. I cannot think of any of the centers off the top of my head, although Cynthia knows. But what we tend to do at the Summit, we'll give them the option of group, other group locations. But what we typically do at the Summit is we'll teach the skills in individual sessions. So it's not really the best practice because a group setting tends to be pretty effective, and we do still have that option available. But Cynthia knows.
Cynthia, you offer that option at Emory? Or you offer it yourself in your practice?
So we did some preliminary research at Emory with middle school groups, and they were actually very high acceptance and good outcomes, and so we were encouraged by that. But I know that Hillside DBT offers outpatient groups for middle school kids. So does Daily DBT and Perimeter DBT.
Any other questions at all? Okay, let's give Nina a round. Thank you.